Well, hello everyone, and bonjour. Welcome to the roundtable on Swiss neutrality and its relevance to peace-building efforts in the Western Balkans. This roundtable is organized by Geneva Center for Neutrality, and it is a think tank based in Geneva, which is a non-partisan and works on three axes. First, it's public debates in Switzerland about neutrality and what is the best path for Switzerland to take in the coming years. Then the role of digital sovereignty and neutrality. And last but not least, connecting with different think tanks and organizations around the world, like the Belgrade Security Conference today, since the GCN believes that exchanging ideas is a great way to creativity and better decision-making. So this tradition of neutrality has allowed Switzerland to build a distinctive role in international diplomacy, offering what is often referred to as its good offices, platforms for negotiation, channels of communication, and safe spaces for dialogue when few others exist. So in the context of the Western Balkans, where societies continue to navigate the legacies of conflict and the complexities of transition, the Swiss experience offers valuable insights. Yet our aim today is not only to praise neutrality as a model, but to examine also it critically, its strengths and limits as a tool for peace building and the conditions under which neutrality can or cannot truly contribute to stability and reconciliation. To help us guide this discussion, we'll look at a few key themes: the foundations of Swiss neutrality, how it evolved and what principles sustain it, neutrality as a resource for dialogue, for trust and credibility, what Switzerland's mediation and good offices experience can teach us, how this approach might or might not, as I said, translate to the political and social realities of the Western Balkans, and the limits and risk of applying neutrality in divided contexts. So the objectives of this roundtable are quite straightforward. First, to better understand how Swiss neutrality actually functions as a tool of diplomacy and conflict resolution. Second, to identify which aspects of that experience could be useful for post-conflict societies in this region. And finally, to generate some concrete policy and institutional ideas for using neutral facilitation to strengthen dialogue and governance here in the Balkans. So over the next half an hour and a half, we hope to unpack these issues in an open and interactive way. Let me once again welcome all of you and then our panelists. By my right side, Ambassador Jean-Daniel Ruch, a former Swiss ambassador to Serbia. Nicolas Ramseier, president of Geneva Center for Neutrality, the organizer of this roundtable. And last but not least, Alexandra, the director of International Security Dialogue Department from Geneva Center for Security Policy. First, we will start with several questions to each of you. We will start from the ambassador. Can you tell us first what challenges but also opportunities did you encounter in representing Switzerland's neutrality in Serbia during your diplomatic mandate and the broader region?
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be back here. And of course, I don't forget the significance of the location of where we are now. I mean, this has been a key place, a key location for all those who refused back then the logic of the blocks. We are the Sava Center, an important symbolic place for the creation and the development of the non-aligned movement. I don't say that non-alignment is same as neutrality. I don't say that non-alignment is very much current, but this place symbolizes times when the country we are in thought they could play a different role and not accept the logic of the blocks. And it seems to me that we have a number of countries today throughout the world who do refuse the logic of the blocks. We know that some of the great powers, they have this attitude of you are either with us or against us. And I think that especially for societies which are at the fringe between two geopolitical areas, or called as spheres of influence, it's a sad reality today that we are back into geopolitics which are based on spheres of influence. And you have some countries which are at the limit between two. Naturally, they are torn apart. And I think it is irresponsible to force those countries to choose. And then the solution for not choosing is maybe to adopt a policy of neutrality that has to be recognized. This is very true. Previous speaker talked about that. This is very much the basis of our neutrality. We were created, or our neutrality was recognized in 1815 under the impetus of the Russian Tsar, Alexander I, to create a buffer zone between two warring parties, which were the French and the Germans. And the German powers, I must say, because there was no Germany then, but there was Austria-Hungary and Prussia. And thanks God, our neutrality was recognized, because during the First World War, if we had not had policy of neutrality, and if neutrality had not already become part of our DNA, then probably would have been torn apart between the French part, which was pro-French, and the German part, which was very much on the side of the Axis forces. So in this context, neutrality was first and foremost a security policy instrument, or an instrument to ensure our survival in front of complicated neighbors. Thanks God they are less complicated today, and let's hope it continues. That's why the EU is very good, because they are not very good at projecting peace, but they are at least good at maintaining peace among themselves. Now, what I have noticed, not only here, because then Swiss neutrality has evolved and has become an export product, and it's become part of our soft power, like the Swiss Army knife. That's our contribution to military security. And so what I would say is that in this region and elsewhere, because the soft power attached to Switzerland is so strong, you show the Swiss flag in Singapore, in Israel, or here, and then people will immediately react by saying, oh, neutrality. So this soft power helped us to play a useful role in this region. We can talk more about that, because the sort of peacemaking in this region has been monopolized by the European Union and the US with limited success, but also elsewhere. And I take as an example 2014, the Ukraine war, when Switzerland played a key role in coming to the ceasefire and to the Minsk agreements. Nowadays, the situation is a little bit different. Russia does not consider us as a credible neutral player anymore. Our policy in the Middle East also has damaged our reputation, but I think that this still can be, let's say, healed, or can lead to a more positive action in the future. I will stop there, because you don't want me to speak too long, I guess.
That's okay, but I do have an additional question that goes along with what you have mentioned, and that's the examples in this area, in the Balkans. Can you give us the examples of diplomatic and social dialogue in the Balkans that was the result of the Swiss tradition of neutrality and the Swiss capacity for this?
Well, we have. I mean, Switzerland, the Swiss federal government has been carrying out, of supporting track 1.5, as is called. 1.5 means not government, but almost, meaning influential people with direct access to decision makers, between Kosovars and Serbs for quite a long time now, and it has been sort of a laboratory where solutions and channels of communications could take place. This is one example that comes to my mind, where I participated also.
Okay, but maybe a little bit more demanding question then would be, what parts of the Swiss diplomatic culture would be most relevant, or at least translatable, to the Balkan context, and whether we can actually translate it?
Yes, because I think our neutrality cannot be understood without some other elements of our constitution and our DNA, our identity, and one of them, which I think would be relevant for the region, is direct democracy. I see what happens in Serbia, what has happened in Serbia over the past month, and I'm amazed by how much it seems that those students are getting some inspiration from the notion of direct democracy. Direct democracy means first and foremost that the leaders are able to listen to the people and the sovereign is really the people, but really. And you are not trying to manipulate because you trust that the people have the necessary maturity to make informed decisions. So I think, in my view, and I said that for a very long time, if you want to solve the Kosovo issue, give the right to the people to vote, to the people in Kosovo to vote, and to make their own decisions on where they want to belong. This is how we solved our last territorial problem, which was in my region, by asking basically each and every municipality, which cantons do you want to belong to? What's the purpose of keeping in a canton people who don't want to live in this kind of state? So I would go for direct democracy, if you ask me.
Thank you. That's a very precise answer. We will move along to Nicolas or Mr. Ramseier. How does the Geneva Center for Neutrality conceptualize neutrality beyond this non-alignment that we have mentioned, and as a foundation for sustainable, the stress is on sustainable peace building?
Thank you. No problem. You can call me Nicolas. First of all, I'm very glad and happy to be here. I would like to thank the organizer. It's always great. It's especially great for me because I had the pleasure to serve as a diplomat for Switzerland 2 years ago. And whenever I saw in my calendar that there were some events organized by the BSC, I was always rushing to be the one that could be sent and attempt. So I'm happy to be now a participant. Now, on the question of neutrality, Swiss neutrality, and how it can be transferred or applied to the Balkans, and which elements can be taken, and whether we should copy-paste the exact Swiss system to the Balkan or not. First, let me tell you that neutrality is unfortunately a rather complex architecture system. And I would like to give you 3 elements which I believe are necessary to be able to be a neutral state. Then I'll tell you why I think it's actually beneficial, because in fact, what's the point to try to do it if it's not? And why Serbia and in general the Balkans could benefit and the world could benefit from adopting these measures. First of all, in order to be a neutral state, I believe one needs to be internally stable. One needs to be independent or relatively independent. Of course, no country can be fully independent because we're all connected, but have some degree of independency. And third, one needs to have a certain reputation. When it comes to stability, one key factor is, of course, the economy. And here I have to say that the Serbians, one can criticize the Serbian government and the Serbians, but the fact is that it fully adopted a liberal free market economy, and it has seen growth in the last 10 years, which contribute to having a more stable and better quality of life. I think debate is interesting when you have controversial ideas and when people are not always agreeing. So I'm going to tell you something which I believe is good for Serbia, and you might disagree. I think Serbia can benefit economically by being close to the European Union, and I understand that they want to develop more links, but I don't necessarily think that being inside the European Union is the best for them. Switzerland has benefited enormously by having connection to the European Union, but also benefit enormously by being able to go to the Middle East, to go to South America, to go to China, and show that we're a partner that is not inside the European Union. And I think Serbia, which has similar size and is also a landlocked country, could also benefit from this game. So actually, not 100% sure that they should necessarily pursue EU membership, but because it's a round table, I'm looking forward to discussing this with you. Also, having different partners guarantee a more robust long-term systems, because, you all know probably the idea not to put all your eggs in one basket. It's the same idea for the economy. Now, I've seen also that Serbia has been developing in the tech world. In the last 20 years, the biggest growth came from the tech industry. And I believe this is typically a place where the Swiss experience and knowledge and tradition and trust can play a role. So I welcome the idea that Switzerland and Serbia cooperate more on this topic. Now, when it comes to the notion of independence, in some sense, if I want to be provocative, which I generally love in public debate, one could say that Switzerland is a successful case of neutrality, And Lebanon, which I believe will be extremely profitable from being neutral, is not. And the main reason, or one of the reasons, is because Lebanon is stored inside, because there's a lot of outside foreign intervention inside the country. And in order for Serbia to go the Swiss way and not the Lebanese way, it needs to build a strong capacity to be independent. By the way, which also proved that neutrality is a courageous act which requires proactivity. Also one point on independence. A lot of today's world has shifted to the digital realm. And in order to be independent or partially independent on that realm, one needs to have control over its own data. And I believe Serbia, like Switzerland, could benefit from having their own infrastructure, storing their own data in Serbia and Switzerland in Switzerland, in order that these key elements which have real values are not in the USA or in China and are not participating in an indirect technological conflict. Now, the last one is what I call reputation. This one is also not easy to achieve. Neutrality means accepting that there are different systems in the world, different culture, and that one should not go outside and judge the others. And that is difficult to reach, because we all want to have our opinions, we all want to share our ideas, but one has to restrain oneself from judging the others. And here I want to tell you that Serbia, in some sense, has an advantage here, because it is still one of the only cities I know where you can have a direct flight from Belgrade to New York, from Belgrade to Beijing, and from Belgrade to Moscow. And this is an asset. This is not a problem. And I believe this is also a chance for Serbia to become a diplomatic powerhouse, because we, the Swiss, and if you want, we can discuss this, but we, the Swiss, put sanction on Russia in 2022. I believe we had to do it. I believe we were pressured by the European Union, and we had no choice. But that means that a lot of the diplomatic activity which happened in my city, Geneva, I'm from Geneva, have to switch and go somewhere else. Currently, most of these activities went to the UAE or Turkey. And I believe there is a strong chance for Serbia to catch this moment, and I'm just floating an idea here, but I think there's a strong chance for Geneva, my city, and Belgrade to team up and create a stronger diplomatic powerhouse, because one can bring our Swiss experience in diplomacy, our knowledge and reputation, to a younger diplomatic player who can bring the logistics and venue and possibilities. And my final, let's say, words before opening the debate is, why do we care to do all this? I mean, why should Serbia embark in this, or why I believe Serbia would have an advantage in embarking this long road and courageous road of becoming more neutral? Because I believe that, of course, I would like the world to be perfect. And I believe that war is a catastrophic outcome. But great powers like China, the US, and Russia and France have always found ways at provoking and fighting with one another, unfortunately. And as a Swiss, I can only control or partially control what's going on in Switzerland. And I think Serbs can only do the same in Serbia. And we are dependent on these powers, unfortunately. So the best we can do is provide safe zone, buffer zones, which can reduce tension by providing ability to discuss. Because no matter what we think, all war have to end at some point, and the only way to end up in a decent way is to having dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolas, and thank you for all the reflections, but also very concrete proposals regarding also the cooperation and the potential for cooperation with Serbia. We have mentioned the challenge of neutrality, which is the recognition, as Ambassador also said. So what institutional or legal safeguards make neutrality credible and functional? So in order not to leave it on the idea, but to have it as a credible and functional tool.
Well, like I said, for example, when I was posted in Belgrade as a young diplomat, we collaborate in order to bring the CERN to Belgrade, and we had scientific collaboration between Switzerland and Serbia on this topic, which allowed scientists from all around the world to not only work in Geneva but also in Serbia. Why don't we extend this to a bigger frame when it comes to our diplomatic service? Why don't we have more member of parliament from both countries? Actually, I was yesterday with, because since 2 months, I'm also sitting in the Security Council of Switzerland, which advised the parliament on security issues. And I was 2 days ago with member of parliament from Switzerland to the parliament of Serbia. Why don't we have this as a daily, or maybe not daily, but monthly exercise in order to strengthen our ability to exchange ideas and cooperation? This could be an institutional frame which would facilitate dialogue.
Thank you also for a very concrete answer. And you have mentioned cooperation with Serbia, and you have put justifiably the accent on cooperation with Serbia. But what is with the Balkans as itself? How can a think tank like GCN serve as a platform for trust-based dialogue across the region?
So the Geneva Center for Neutrality believes that by having open debate, discussions, transparent, we can create good ideas. In my country, in Switzerland, when you want to change something, the best way is to gather as many people as possible, create a good idea, which is, by the way, not always the starting idea that you have, because these ideas tend to evolve. And then once you have something which is kind of like a compromise, which in French, from France, sounds like a bad word, and in French from Switzerland sounds like a great word, because we believe that compromise is the ability to find a middle way which is workable, and in some other countries this is seen as weakness. But anyway, to answer your question, the Geneva Center for Neutrality is here, I believe, my role, and I believe that's what I try to do in my country, is to create these good ideas which we funnel up to the government. And so this is what we can do in practice to help the Balkans, because I believe that if we create these good ideas which we funnel to Switzerland, and Switzerland has a good reputation in the Balkans, it can then pass it on to the Serbian government, and having a stable Serbia, neutral Serbia that respects all the players and believe in federalism inside its own country would stabilize the region as a whole.
Okay, thank you. Before we go to Alexandra, I would also ask just the ambassador to...
I would like just to add one sentence to what my friend Nicolas has said. 5% of the Swiss population originates from this region. Kosovo, Serbia, Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Macedonia. So this, I think, illustrates the importance for us to have a stable Balkans. But it shows also how much, even without any government policy, Switzerland supports this whole region. As we know, the remittances that those people are providing to their countries of origin amounts to somewhere between 10 and 15% of the GDP, and a significant portion of that stems from our country. That's why we have almost a symbiotic relationship with, not just with Serbia, but with the whole region.
Thank you for the short reflection. I appreciate it. We have to move on. Mrs. Matas, we've been talking about the Western Balkans and the region, but let's go wider than that. Let's talk about the geopolitical setting and what role does or do neutral states play?
Well, first of all, let me also express my gratitude to our partners from the Geneva Center for Neutrality. We used to work together on several occasions, and I think it was always a fruitful partnership. So I'm very happy to be here with you on this panel. And on your question, Lejla, well, I think that Nicolas already provided some elements like a pathway, you know, to my presentation. And I believe that we live today in an extremely polarized environment, and it's clear that we need bridge builders. And neutral states have traditionally been exactly that. If we think back 50 years, countries like Finland, like Switzerland, but also like Yugoslavia, played a key role in keeping the dialogue between East and West going. And that's how we got the Helsinki Final Act 50 years ago and the whole CSCE process. And that is perhaps why there is preference still today for neutral countries to chair the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. For instance, you know that Malta was chairing it last year, and Switzerland will be chairing the OSCE next year. Today, neutral and non-aligned movements have lost its influence, and the trend is more for selective multi-alignment than to a non-alignment. Emerging powers like India, they prefer to engage with various partners across the geopolitical divisions, and they choose to cooperate à la carte than to align formally with someone. And the number of formally neutral countries is shrinking because, again, of the great power rivalry. The countries that are positioned between the great powers, they have to join alliances sometimes to defend their sovereignty. At the same time, for the countries that still remain officially neutral, there is a lot of pressure to take sides. And I mean, we even see it in Switzerland. I'm talking on behalf of the impartial institution that is based in Geneva, in Switzerland, and we provide this neutral and safe platforms for dialogue. And for us, it's really sometimes a very difficult task. I'll give you an example of our work, for instance, when we promote dialogue between the West and Russia. We are very often criticized by NATO countries, by Ukraine. We are accused to be pro-Russian. And on the other hand, as Switzerland joined the EU sanctions against Russia, Moscow says that Switzerland is not neutral anymore, what Nicolas has mentioned. So maintaining neutrality today is very difficult. But with all that said, I believe that neutrality is still a real value because it gives small and medium-sized states strategic autonomy. They are not pulled into conflicts that they don't want to be part of, and they can make their own choices. And I refer to what you said, Ambassador Ruch. Neutrality can really be empowering in these cases, as long as also it's understood correctly. And that brings me to an important point, that neutral doesn't mean passive and doesn't mean indifferent. It doesn't mean that we just sit back and ignore what's happening. It also doesn't mean that you remain neutral in regards to the violations of international law. Neutral countries have actually a direct interest in upholding a world order that is based on international law, because they are best protected by it. And that's what we often call positive or constructive or active neutrality.
Alexandra, thank you for that. You have mentioned also the challenges, the recognition, the credibility of the neutrality. What could be the tools that countries can globally use to overcome polarization? What would be the concrete tools in order to recognize the benefits of neutrality?
Well, I think on the tools of neutral countries, I can mention several. Neutral countries can clearly play an active role of a mediator, of a facilitator. But when it is not possible, they can at least provide safe space for dialogue. Neutral countries are well placed to hold peace talks, mediation efforts, back-channel discussions, whatever keeps the communication alive. And in Switzerland, for example, in International Geneva That's what we do at the GCSP, so not the BCSP, so it's just the Geneva at the beginning Center for Security Policy. We host this track 2s, and I apologize to the ones who've been here on the previous panel. I spoke already about some of our work on facilitating track 2 exchanges. We do it on both geopolitical topics, strategic stability, nuclear non-proliferation, arms control. We work on regional issues. We have a special focus on the future of European security. And this in the situation when multilateral organizations are blocked, the governments don't want to talk to each other. There is a lot of demand for this type of informal dialogue and informal exchanges. Second, I think I already mentioned this, that neutral states can act as strong defenders of international law and humanitarian norms. Neutral countries often have more freedom to speak up and are more trusted in providing humanitarian assistance. I think the most obvious example here is the work of the International Committee of the Red Cross. Finally, the third is that neutral, non-allied or even multi-aligned states can work together to strengthen multilateralism, which is clearly in demise now. We heard yesterday, I think, on one of the panels that multilateral institutions don't work, so they are irrelevant and they are outdated. I believe that the problem is not the multilateral organizations. Multilateral organizations are the instrument of states, and when there is no political will to use these multilateral organizations, then they don't function. And clearly now we live in this era of great powers rivalry, and they have no interest to use multilateral organizations. So there is a clear tendency to move to this deal-making right now, especially with President Trump. So it's in the interest of smaller, of medium-sized states to keep the multilateral system running, and I think that's one of the main tools of their work.
Thank you for defining the roles of these neutral states or the tools, but let's define the process. How do you enhance inclusivity and reduce polarization in conflict-affected societies? What are the know-hows? What are the phases?
Well, it's not an easy task, but I think the answer is obvious. You need to talk to everyone. Now we see that we turn a lot to this public diplomacy tool. The countries talk to each other through public statements in media. We forgot to use what quiet diplomacy is, what basically the work of diplomats are. Diplomats, it's not about presenting your country's position. Diplomatic work is about talking to your enemies and also trying to find solutions. But at the time when this is not happening, again, I think I would underline the importance of these informal exchanges, track 2 exchanges, and basically talking with everyone and trying not to take sides. Because as soon as you take side, you lose your credibility as mediator in such process.
Thank you for this, for the insightful last answer, and this actually brings us to the discussion part. But if you have your reflection to what Alexandra said.
No, I thought your question was how to be inclusive within the society when there are different opinions on neutrality. For instance, typically in our case, when Switzerland took the sanctions against Russia because of some pressure, although it's mysterious, the official reason, they made a decision not to take sanctions but to take measures to make sure that Switzerland would not be used to circumvent the Western sanctions on a Thursday. And the next Tuesday, they said because of the grave violations of international law, Switzerland will adopt the EU sanctions. Now, what happened over that weekend to justify the change of mind? The rumor is that there were terrible pressures and so on, but we don't know. The people were never informed. And in a country like Switzerland, where there is a high maturity among the population, this does not go well. So the result was that 100,000 citizens signed what we call a constitutional initiative, asking to put in the constitution neutrality, but also the fact that Switzerland in the future will not take any sanctions which are not decided by the United Nations Security Council. So the way to solve the divergences between various parts of the population, disconnect to the direct democracy, is to have people vote. And usually people do respect the majority because there is a great trust into the integrity of elections or referendums in Switzerland.
Of course, presumably to have fair elections and not rigged. I have a question for Nicolas, because you have mentioned some points that go beyond maybe neutrality. So what is the line between the facilitation and intervention? Where can we draw this line?
You mean in the sense between facilitating a dialogue between two countries, or at what point do you intervene in someone else's affair? Well, the first one is because the first facilitation generally comes when there is a need and a request from the other party. That's one of the main difference. And the second is the way one generally approach it. In my experience, it's much easier and better, and you have more, let's say, positive results if you discuss with another state or another group of people in a state and convince them than having you as a mediator is a net positive outcome to the situation rather than imposing it. In most of the, actually I think in all the, well, Jean-Daniel will confirm or not, but as far as I know, in all the successful mediation that Switzerland took part, there were at least a push or a need from both parties, or in some case even the three parties, that we would step up and come in as a mediator. And this is sometimes not public, but this happens a lot. So my answer is it's when it comes to one should have the willingness from parties to have us, and second, if they are not clear or they fully not understand that this is in their advantage, we should first explain them and have them show their interest. And this happened, by the way, just one small thing, this happened in much more cases than one can think about. For example, and Jean-Daniel, maybe if he wished to talk about this, can talk about this, but when the war in 2022 started, we, the Swiss, were asked by various parties, including the Russians, to provide our experiences in the discussions that happened in Turkey in March. So, of course, I like to say that we, the Swiss, are not always the greatest when it comes to PR and communications, and maybe we could learn a lot from our American friends that are great at making TV shows and big announcements and stuff like this, and we tend to be a bit more discreet. But I guarantee that there's a lot of cases where our experience was either needed or requested.
But it is kind of like a common sense that actually the conflicting parties they want to save face, so that's basically why they are doing it behind the closed doors. They don't want to make their how do you say, like when you're making like a favor to the other country public. What are your reflections? What is your experience? Would you agree with Nicolas?
Can I just say one thing maybe? This is, I think, something we should work on in the world in general. You rightly so mentioned the fact that when there's a conflict, parties don't want to lose face by going to the negotiation table. Well, maybe I'm naive, but I think it's braver and you require more experience and wiseness and courage and age to go to the negotiating table than to fight till death. And this is maybe an idea that one could try to change in the world.
Thank you.
Of course, you cannot force people to make peace if they don't want to. So, and you cannot force yourself to be a mediator if the parties are not in agreement. Our way, but not only ours, several others, to try to carry out a successful mediation has been the result of an attitude and also of a history. The attitude is you don't judge, you listen. And you listen to the narratives coming from all sides. Because if you say this is the right narrative, this is the wrong narrative, you are not a mediator anymore, you are not neutral, you are not even impartial. The fact that in principle we have no hidden agenda, we had no colonies in the past, very important for our activities in Africa, that we are not in NATO, that we are not in the EU, that we have a relatively successful economy, that we have a relatively successful democracy. These are all elements which are playing in the favor of Switzerland as a credible, neutral player or mediator. There is one thing which is, however, very important, and that we see in this kind of new mediators like Qatar and others. These are the resources. And those countries are ready to put significant resources, financial resources, but also people, planes, whatever, into carrying out a mediation. And that's why this sort of new actors, I would define that as flexible neutrality. You know, the Emirates are neutral between Russia and Ukraine with success. They did good things, but you cannot really say they are neutral in Sudan or in Eastern Congo. So this is what I would call flexible neutrality, which is accompanied by the very big investments. Qatar also is another case where they invest heavily. Norway is investing a lot, but Norway has a bit of both because they are also credible for other reasons. So there are different ways to sort of be credible as a mediator.
Moral consistency, we have to always come to that. Moral and neutral consistency, that's the key of the Swiss model.
Sometimes, yeah, well, the Swiss model, but sometimes you can be successful by compensating maybe the lack of credibility as a kind of moral, having a moral high ground by money.
Interesting. This brings us to very tangible metrics, Alexandra. We are talking about this invisible results of mediation and neutral mediation. So what are the metrics that can help us measure the progress of credible neutral mediation process?
Well, I think first of all, we need to clearly distinguish negotiations, mediation, and dialogue facilitation. I think those are different, completely different things. Again, negotiations are those discussions between track one actors, be it head of states, ministers, diplomats, official state delegations talking to each other. Mediation is the case when there is an active mediator. I think both of my colleagues mentioned that there should be clearly consent from conflicting parties to have this mediator. There should be a mandate for this mediator, what kind of issues should be discussed and solved. And then it's a very active work. And I think here, again, it's rather obvious. It's bringing a change. It's bringing a sustainable end to conflict, be it ceasefire, but also very often, of course, to make it sustainable, accompanied by a political settlement. When we talk about the dialogue facilitation, I think the situation here is different, because the idea of this informal space is to bring ideas to the decision makers, policy makers in the capitals, that they can potentially use it in negotiations, in preparing their negotiation positions, also maybe in simulation of negotiations, and also in some mediation processes. And here, how to measure impact, I think it's much more difficult. We don't expect, I'll take example of our work. You know, I just presented peace metrics here. We don't expect the war to be over tomorrow, because we suggested those ideas. But how we can measure, and that's also what we need to report to donors, for example, what is the impact of your work, guys? You bring all these people together, they talk, and what is the result? Well, it's very hard. There is not something that you can right away see, but what we believe is that the interest, one measurement is the interest of major stakeholders, the interest of decision makers in the key capitals. And we usually have this shuttle diplomacy. We travel to all the important capitals. We talk to decision makers, and they receive those ideas with a lot of interest. Sometimes what comes out of it, some official statements that were influenced by dialogue. Sometimes it could be also articles, opinions in influential media. And, well, the last one I would say is just the fact of having those dialogues. Basically, if the counterparts find it useful to come and discuss those ideas, that's already a measurement in itself.
But when you have this great power competition in the given region, how do you sustain this credibility and neutrality? How do you bring these activities to light or to realization?
Well, I will refer again to what has been said. I think the reputation plays a very important role. As a Swiss institution, it's helpful. Not in every environment, but in most of them. I remember my trip to China last year, and everywhere I heard you are a neutral country, and we really would like to work with you, and we trust you because you are neutral. So I think that's a very, very positive reputation. And again, you know, maintaining trust of the parties that the discussions will not go public. That we will not invite journalists one day to those, there will be no leakages, something that sometimes is hard to control. And again, engaging with different parties and not taking sides, very important.
Thank you. So not just clearly reputation, but reputation based on history and facts. We've talked a lot about this Swiss-style neutral platform. Can it exist in the Balkans, or are you skeptical, Nicolas?
Well, I think it should exist in the Balkans. This would be very good for both Serbia and the region in general. I just wanted to give you one point about the question of trust and ability to mediate. Now, more and more we live in the digital world. A lot of what we're doing was transferred there, including a large chunk of the economy. And we have more and more the problem of traceability. If we have now a huge, shutdown in Texas because some plants were the target of a cyber attack, it's very difficult to know who did it. And or sometimes it's even a byproduct or an accident of another attempt from another state or non-state actor to do something else. And I think this produces a threat in the sense that in order to have neutral states and mediation and peace building, including in the Balkans, we need this notion of trust. And by the way, just to come back to the topic of the Balkans, I believe the reason why Switzerland can be as successful and was a successful mediator in bringing peace to the Balkans because most countries, or actually I think all of the countries in the Balkans have a rather good relations with Switzerland, which makes it easy. So the one idea that one could work between Switzerland and Serbia and or Europe in general, I think Europe would benefit from this, about this notion of trust, is to have certain written rules how we use data, including having open source systems, transparent systems, and data stores at least in Europe, in order to reduce these threats and increase trust. And why not even to go a step further and create because I know that in Serbia you have a very successful science tech park. Why not to team up to create a tech neutral label, which any companies that want to engage in activities in Europe has to have, which would guarantee basic rules. And this would ultimately increase the notion of trust and ultimately decrease the notion of conflict.
We will talk more about this institutionalization of neutrality. What would be your reflection, Ambassador, having in mind your political and diplomatic experience in Serbia and in the region? Can this Swiss-style model be applied, having in mind the complexity of the Balkans and different history that Switzerland has with its cantons?
I don't know why the next Putin-Trump summit could not take place in this Sava Center, for instance. Why not? The plan was to have it in Budapest, probably to thank Mr. Orban for leaving the International Criminal Court, which is, of course, a very sad move. The previous one was in Anchorage. The previous summit between an American and a Russian president was in Geneva, which is sort of a natural place to have these sort of things. Traditionally, over the past 80 years or so, Yugoslavia and then Serbia has quite aptly managed to maintain bridges with all sides. Now I think there is a little bit of a weakness, but this can be corrected in the future. It's a matter of will. It's a matter of political will at the end of the day. But I must also add something. It's also something that is related to the regional situation. I think this region could play a really useful role and become also an economic hub of first importance. But first, they should finally, after 30 years, sort out their problems. Because in terms of reputation, credibility, soft power, you know, when you speak Serbia, people in the world are continuing saying, oh, Serbia, and they have this problem with those, and the problem with Kosovo, and with Bosnia. And you speak about Bosnia, oh, Bosnia, divided society. And you speak of Kosovo. So, you know, this reputation plays a role also in the outside world. Most of it is wrong in my view, because I see formidable people with a huge potential here. And not just for our national football team. Thank you very much, by the way. But there is a huge potential. But what should happen really is that first you can come and say, look, we have managed to solve our problems. And one of the difference between the people in this region and the various people in our country is that I don't know if you can say you rely, but there is way too much interference from neighboring states and sometimes from states far away in the domestic politics of these countries. I'm pretty sure that if you had left it to the leaders of Serbia and Kosovo, today this matter would be solved without always having an interference from somewhere else out of other conceptions. So, yeah, well, what I can say, take your destiny in your hands and then you will be able to play a fantastic role.
Yes, to add one element to this, I just want to remind you, if you've never been to Switzerland, I invite you to come. We have 3 different cultures, 4 languages, 2 different religions, and we have one country. And somehow it works. In some sense, it's... even to me, sometimes I ask myself how we do it. And I think that the same can be said in terms of situation in the Balkans. You also have different culture, religion, and groups. And I would say 2, and even one can say 3 elements to this, which makes it work in Switzerland, is we have a strong notion of federalism. Actually, Switzerland is called Confédération Helvétique, which means we have this notion of respect, that we try to give a certain degree of autonomy to the different regions, without necessarily talking about, while still remaining in one country. And we have this strong notion of consensus, this notion that one can never rule alone, one can never take all the decision alone. Actually, I had the chance when I was 22 to be elected to the Parliament of Geneva when I was a young student, and I ended up in a parliament where we had 7 different parties with none who had more than 15% or 20% of the electorate, which meant that every single law we had to pass, we had to have a coalition, and this was very, very frequent that the coalitions which was passing one law was not the same of the one passing a law 1 hour or 2 hours after, a different one. And that's a very strong notion, and I think the Balkans need to somehow go out of this idea that if you're right and if you're if you're the strongest and if you're right, you should impose your ideas, and enter more into a notion that the middle ground is sometimes better for everybody. But this is, of course, only my point of view. You're free to debate with me.
That's the common sense we were talking about. Because we're coming close to an end, I would like to ask my last question, and then we can proceed to the question of the audience. And I would ask Alexandra, we talked a lot, actually Nicolas mentioned the institutionalization through the Museum Tech Neutrality Lab, if I understood this well. How can neutrality be institutionalized without becoming political and attached to some of the notions of the political streams? Made me do it.
So, how to institutionalize neutrality without being politicized?
Exactly. How?
Well, I'll be very much.
Is it a governmental body? It cannot be a governmental body.
I'll answer. Again, I like contradictions. So I'm going to tell you that I think it would be a wrong idea, because politics is fantastic. And I'll tell my point of view of politics before you jump at me. My conception, which is entirely mine, is that everybody that is alive, playing even a small role in one society, should be a political actor. We are all, by definition, political actor as long as we respect very basic rules, like not wanting to kill each other and things like this. Everybody that wakes up, go to work or go to study or do anything is being a political actor, in my view. And that means that we all, because we all should be both part of the political spectrum and be allowed to be part of the political spectrum. So I don't think one should, let's say, extract politics out of neutrality. But of course, this is my point of view, and this is a great thing that we have in Switzerland. I think, is because anybody who is willing to put energy and time is able to enter the political arena. And by the way, we're the only country that I know of where politics is not a job. I was never paid, or I was very little paid when I was sitting in the parliament, and I was doing it next to my study and then my job. And even at the federal level, nobody in the parliament do it as a real job. This is institutionally speaking, but this is true. This is considered, it's not a job. In my country, politics is an activity you do next to your real job. Those sitting in the federal parliament are teacher, painter, doctor,
representative of various lobbies.
Representative of various lobbies, which is a good thing, because we need to include them, and economy plays a huge role in the political system, and we saw it because the 6 billionaires from Switzerland were able to go and talk to Donald Trump and reduce the taxes. So why not? I'm sorry, but this is my point of view. Of course, we can disagree, but this is part of the political system, and I'm very proud that I come from a country where none of the politicians are professional politicians, and it should be like this, because we are all politicians.
This is like the last day at a seaside when it's the best. We're coming to an end, but you disagree.
Well, first, unfortunately, it used to be the case a few years ago, but unfortunately now more and more, even of our current ministers, they have done nothing else but politics in their lives, and they were subsidized by various lobbies. For instance, the Minister of Foreign Affairs received 180,000 Swiss francs a year from the pharma lobby for many years before entering the government. Well, maybe, thanks God, he's Minister of Foreign Affairs, but in a system like Switzerland, it could very well be Minister of Health. But this is not considered as a conflict of interest in our system. Our notion of corruption is a bit different. But what I wanted to say about institutionalization, Precisely, I mean, there is one thing. At the national level, how do you institutionalize the concept of neutrality? Well, you need a consensus of this in the society. You need an understanding by the politicians, by the leaders, of what it means neutrality. As I said before, you know, an attitude. It's first an attitude where you listen and you don't take positions. Doesn't mean that you don't condemn violations of international law. Yes. I want to call somebody famous in this city, Archibald Reis. You all know Archibald Reis. The most famous with here with Carla Del Ponte. They did both the same thing, by the way. They prosecuted war crimes. And Archibald Reis say, in front of crime, nobody is neutral. And I really like that expression very much. So I think you can be neutral, but you have to make sure that criminals are being put to jail. So in our case, we will see when we vote on this initiative on neutrality, there will be a popular vote. And maybe that will strengthen even the prescriptions to our government to implement neutrality while not adopting sanctions which are not taken by the Security Council. But there is more to it. I do trust that there is some interest in the world, and I feel a critical mass of people around the world who would like to stay out of this big powers competition, and therefore to create a movement, international, which would be called active neutrality, or it could be called something else. But let me give you a concrete example. We were asked in June to organize in Geneva a meeting of civil society leaders about the notion of neutrality, to reflect on what does active neutrality mean? How can it contribute to peace? What does it mean for the countries? The result were a few documents, but what was the most interesting thing is that even though we had no budget, people paid themselves for their travels, for their hotels. Okay, we gave a little bit of food and we had a meeting room. Despite all that, we had 60 participants from 27 countries who came to Geneva, which is not the cheapest place in the world, because they have all these billionaires, and plus 30 people online. Now, the next step next year would be to have a World Congress with civil society organizations from all continents who are interested in the notion of neutrality and to push that forward, maybe to create an alliance, a network, a federation, to start to play an increased role. Now, there is a big difference compared to the days of the non-aligned movement. What is the difference? If you remove China, Russia, the US, the European Union, you will still find that the remaining countries represent something around 25 to 30% of the world GDP, which is certainly much more than what you had in the 50s and 60s when So there is a critical mass of states who have an interest not to take sides and to say we need a new multilateral framework that works with same rules for anyone. We are not interested in these transactional policies where you play on the force. And one final comment on the people who say the multilateral system is dead. Well, haven't you seen the news yesterday? The Pope, the future Nobel Peace Prize of unilateralism and of arms twisting, Mr. Donald Trump himself decided to go to the Security Council to have his peace plan for Gaza being endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. Isn't that something completely new? This is the return of the United Nations as a place for conflict resolution. And I think we should all welcome that. You don't need to welcome the Trump peace plan, which has lots of weaknesses. But the point is that the UN is becoming, again, a place where they talk about peace. Because I've tried to make a small search. I think that the last time the United Nations had taken an important, which had so many potential repercussions, was Libya in 2011, where the repercussions were not necessarily very positive for world peace. But indeed, we have been through the desert. And today, maybe there is a chance to bring the UN back into, and multilateralism back into some sort of relevance.
And back to the purpose of the UN. Okay, so since we have to close this, we are a little bit in red, and I also have to close the whole ceremony. My main takeaways from this roundtable would be that neutrality is actually a political necessity and a social necessity. That's what neutrality is, and that being neutral doesn't mean passive. On the contrary, sometimes it's the best course of action because it's based on international law and humanitarian law. And if you want to be a neutral state, it has to be backed by facts, by history, in order to build your reputation. So now I'm going to open 5 minutes for questions and answers. We have a question, 2 questions. Maybe we can have 3 and that's it. Let's stay at 2. Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the very interesting viewpoints. Pierluigi Nicolas from Italian Association of Energy Economists and volunteering on energy security matters at UNECE. So drawing on your last observation on the institutionalization of peace and neutrality, amid increased scrutinization from the global south over the allegation that there are double standards and claims that the veto power in the UN is probably not the best system to guarantee neutrality, and your consideration that this is the criteria, which I personally like to, draw the line. Do we impose the sanctions to the Russians or not? How do you redraw, minding the changing paradigms, the line between an ethical approach and a neutral approach when it comes to these matters like the Russian sanctions, for example, because the Russians made a point, you are not neutral anymore, please.
I think that the difference between a neutral approach and an ethical approach is very simple. What can small states like Switzerland do to make the world tomorrow better? Full stop. That's it. And if making the world better means sitting with the worst people in order to try to bring a peace deal, then I think the ethical long-term thing to do is just that. So my answer is whatever that helps bringing the world to a better place tomorrow for our kids.
I think this is a very, very, very relevant question, and for me the answer is relatively easy. You have to have the same standards whatever the situation. And whatever the situation, war crimes have to be not just condemned, but you have to make sure that war criminals are being brought to justice, either at the ICC, either locally, or even in your own country. Now, it's true that what we did was wrong. What our government did by taking sanctions against Russia, I think it was wrong. What we did by not taking sanctions against Israel, not taking sanctions, but by applying the law regarding Israel, meaning stopping any investment in the military industry of Israel because this could amount to a violation of neutrality. The basic law of neutrality is you should not provide a military advantage to one of the conflicting parties. Now, we certainly do not allow our people or our banks to invest in, I don't know, the Iranian military industry. Therefore, we're providing a military advantage. Also, we continue to sell dual-use weapons to Israel, which may also amount to a violation of the law on neutrality. And finally, this may also amount to complicity of war crimes, because maybe some of these goods can be used for the commission of war crimes. So I think that we will need to have a bit of soul-searching on how we did that and why we had these double standards regarding Russia on the one hand and Israel on the other hand. And for that, we will probably there will need to be some elections and change of the composition of the main political bodies in Switzerland. But this is a very relevant question, and I do believe that the thing is the compass. What is your compass? Compass should be the international law that you should apply equally in all circumstances.
Thank you for your answers. We have another question. We will take 2 questions and then we have to close.
Yeah, thank you for the panel discussion. Very interesting. I have a question regarding, you said that you don't see the future of Serbia as part of the European Union. Yeah. And I would like to know if you would say the same thing for the other Balkan countries, and also if you think that, or don't you think that being part of the same union would help the Balkans in setting aside old hostilities?
Yeah, first of all, let me clarify one thing. I'm not a Serbian citizen, so it's not for me to make a decision on the future of Serbia. What I was merely saying is that I am not entirely convinced, personally, that it's in the best interest of Serbia to be in the European Union for a very simple reason. In order to be robust economically, one needs a large quantity of partners, and in the best scenario, in an equal way. Being outside the European Union while being strongly connected to the European Union allow the Serbian private companies or companies that want to settle in Serbia in order to do business with the European Union to be at a different advantage than if they were inside the European Union. I give you a very simple example. One of the biggest, you probably all know Nestlé, but the fact is that Nestlé and other big chocolate companies buys their staple from companies which produce these chocolates. And the biggest producer for Europe is actually located in Serbia, because it's close enough to be serving the European market while having more flexibility in the way it's conducting its business. And Serbia, and again, this is the choice for the Serbian people, this is just my recommendation. Serbia can play the card to be close to the European Union, to know the European markets, to be able to be connected to it, to have strong relations, like Switzerland and Norway, by the way, while being not inside. And I think this is this is an advantage, yes. And I would do that if I were Serbian. And Switzerland does that, and it's been serving us rather well. And I'm talking here from an economic point of view, in order to increase robustness. And in addition, it's not because Serbia is not inside the European Union that it doesn't mean they don't have, or they shouldn't have, relation with the European Union. And actually, the Serbian government, to the best of my knowledge, I'm not in their head, but I have the feeling that's exactly what they understood. But again, I'm not a.
Okay, so basically, Serbia to stay more as a partner of EU than a member of EU. Okay, got it. Alexandra?
Yeah, maybe just a very brief comment coming to generally to our discussion today. I think there is no one-fit-all solutions, right? And we should look at it at case by case. I just would like us to reply to some other comments also today. I think that we need to move from very Eurocentric vision and also think globally, because the things how we see the things here look completely different in the global south. And I will come back to the points of double standards and referring, basically protecting the same values for all the countries and not only for a certain selected list. And coming on the question of neutrality, also again, we here, we are Swiss, we really admire our model, but it wouldn't fit all, of course, given the history, given the neighbors, and you know, the economic situation, etc. But maybe it's just about, you know, having some lessons learned and some best practices that could be useful. So we have been thinking basically what could be the best position for those countries who are between the rivalry of great powers. In the OEC Panel of Eminent Persons report from 2015, well, it was mostly referring to the countries from post-Soviet space who are positioned between Russia and NATO. But it could also be applicable to other countries which are between Russia and NATO, is the neutrality could be potentially a solution, but it's very important that it's accompanied with robust multilateral security guarantees, that we don't have the situation that we have in Ukraine. And another point, I would agree on the economic diversification. I think it's very important to give chance to these countries, not the either or, a choice, you're either with Russia or with EU. These countries need to be able to choose with whom they trade, with the EU, with Russia, with countries of Global South. That should be a sovereign choice that gives autonomy and gives resilience to countries. And I think that might be a more stable solution than aligning with certain powers.
Okay.
I have given the
Okay.
hardest task.
Very briefly, to name a spade. When we are talking about those countries which are, I think we are talking about Moldova. I think we are talking about Georgia. I think we are talking about Ukraine nowadays, in a European context. Maybe Armenia, maybe one day Belarus will also be torn apart. But today you look at the situation in Moldova, you look at the situation in Georgia, this is exactly the countries where you would wish to have a strong identity shared by everybody, where neutrality could be a key component of that identity.
Very briefly, to complete on your question, I am now working in Switzerland on a, today practically entire economic system and payment system and financial system is backed by the dollar, and is the trust behind is the dollar. Now, China and Russia, whether we like it or not, have been buying a large quantity of gold because they want to challenge this system, but they have little chance in order to create an alternative payment system without providing trust guarantees, because financial systems are based on trust. And what they want to do is to use a gold-backed system. Well, that's their choice. That's what they're doing. I can't stop it. But the truth is that we're probably most likely going to enter in the coming years a world where we will have these two competing financial systems. And I'm currently working in a process that in Switzerland, and Serbia could be potentially part of it, could be the only places in the world that accept and treat in the clearinghouse both systems. And that gives you a typical reason why you shouldn't be inside the European Union.
Thank you again for your presentation of your beliefs. And we have a last question. I would ask, I'm sorry, I would say a man, not to say a boy. I think I have seen your hand raised, or no, behind you.
I don't want to take too much time.
It's okay, we have time. This is why I'm giving you the platform. If you want, you could just use the mic, and or you don't want to. That's also fine. Let's go to the girl. She's braver. There.
So, I personally think that there might be a mutual future for Serbia, also regarding the historical past of Yugoslavia, as you proved that it's possible. I really liked your explanation of the flexible neutrality you mentioned, and my question is, at what point Switzerland is not also doesn't also have a flexible neutrality, as, for example, they define their neutrality, as you mentioned, in terms of their values for the laws of human rights and so on, why others may not define neutrality the same way. And so, for example, as you mentioned, Russia isn't regarding maybe Switzerland as neutral anymore as it was regarded in the past.
Okay.
So,
I think we got the question. Thank you so much. Now the answers, whoever feels more.
Yeah.
Everybody can answer that.
Well, the girl was first.
Okay.
I can like also connect to him. It's like I just wanted to say like Switzerland is presented as a model like to the Western Balkans, like you know, with that coexistence among all that you talked about, multilinguistic and multi-ethnic like cultural communities. But however, the region, the Western Balkans, continues to grapple with the legacies of recent conflicts and also intergenerational trauma, which fundamentally shape its social and political dynamics, which like you can feel through the youth that didn't experience war, but we are hearing constantly stories of our parents that, you know, experienced them.
Fed by narratives. Okay, so is this the...
But I just wanted to say, like, in light of these historical complexities on both sides, on what basis can Switzerland credibly position itself as a soft power model for post-conflict transformation in the Western Balkans, and how can its experience be applied in a way that genuinely accounts for the depth and sensitivity of this region?
We would need a whole round table for this. I will have to ask you to be short, and this
just very
last
short.
question we have.
Actually, it's just a comment. I work for the EU. I'm head of political section here at the EU delegation to Serbia. And just one comment. So, of course, we would like to see Serbia inside the EU. It's a free choice of Serbia on what they want to do in the future, but for the moment it's their government's sovereign choice to want to join the EU. They have stated this goal several times in our official contacts with them, and we as the EU, we have a lot to offer to Serbia. We can offer free movement of workers, capital, services, and so on, and people. There's been a lot of investment done by the EU here. There's trade. There are also concrete benefits that Serbia is getting as part of its EU accession process. So I just wanted to say this.
If I may, first to react, I'm very happy that you made this comment, because I wanted to say before. Now you give me the opportunity to say that I feel guilty towards the Serbian people. I feel guilty because when I was the political advisor of the prosecutor of the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal between 2003 and 2007, we managed to incite or to convince the Serbian government to deliver all of the indicted people by the Yugoslavia War Crimes Tribunal, because the carrot was accession to the EU. Now, this process of delivering the indicted war criminals stopped 20 years ago and are not yet in the EU, so I feel a little bit guilty that we made false promises to the European Union. And yeah, I mean, if there could be, I know that it's a perspective, but when the perspective, the promise remains for too long without a clear horizon, that's becoming difficult. But I guess it may change quickly. You know, of course, we don't have the same past, and we had a civil war, but thanks God we had generals in the civil war who instructed their soldiers not to humiliate, not to kill, not to whatever, do harm to civilians, to prisoners, to wounded people. And actually that general was the founder of the International Committee of the Red Cross, and he was the drafter of the first Geneva Convention. So indeed, we don't have the same past, and I don't see any other way than transitional justice. Transitional justice meaning also Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and young people talking, and reparation. By reparation, I don't mean that anybody should pay money to anybody, but reparation in the sense of acknowledging the damage that had been caused. And I know this is a very big issue for the relationship between Serbia and Bosnia, for instance. I'm not going to enter into detail, but you know, I've been working on that for many years, and I think that's the only way, unfortunately.
I am Serbian, but my mom is she was a 15-year-old immigrant from Siege of Sarajevo, so I do listen.
You see my point. Okay, and then the flexible neutrality. I don't think this is the intention. In the early 90s, that was discussed after the fall of the Berlin Wall. We thought already then, well, neutrality now is over. We will live in a world which will be united under the concept of democracy and the rule of law and market economy, and the whole world will follow the Western model of society. Well, we know now that it is not the case, but in those days we thought neutrality, let's have a kind of flexible neutrality because it's not adapted to the situation, because we do not have two blocks. And when was that decision, that discussion was made, the decision was, no, let's stick to the law of neutrality. Now the question is whether this law was applied in a sensible or even in a legal way over the past years, but this is a matter for us to solve internally.
Just want one very quick comment on your question. My way of understanding neutrality for Switzerland, and it's very simple. I think it's a three-story building. The first one is the legal definition, which is the military one that says Switzerland should not intervene in a war on one side when there are two countries fighting. Switzerland should not allow its territory to be used for that war and should not export any material, military material to a war-torn country. And on that exact law definition, which nobody in the world recognizes neutrality, because let's be honest, that's not the perception that people have on neutrality, we are 100% still completely neutral. For example, when NATO, I talked recently with our president, she was president of Switzerland in 1999, and when Bill Clinton asked if they could fly over Switzerland to conduct military operation in which was called the Federation of Yugoslavia, Switzerland refused because it didn't want its territory to be used for this type of operation. That's an example of neutrality. On that sense, we're fully neutral, but I think what matters the most is not this. What matters the most is the second story, which is called perception of neutrality, how other states view you as neutral, and that rely not only on the law, but also on the way you behave and the image you show. And
we're coming back to the fact
last floor is total isolation. One could be totally neutral if one shut down everything, and that's, for example, Turkmenistan is 30 years old, fully neutral country, but it's a much more, with all the respect, isolated country. And I think the game for Switzerland in the coming years is to play this question of perception. At least
we are quite in red, and even the director is giving us the red card. But okay,
I need to give you a couple of sentences, because I think no one commented on the EU membership, on your contribution. Well, I personally think that neutrality and EU membership can go together. You can be neutral state and you can be part of the EU. We're talking about Austria, for instance. I think what was the biggest problem before, that EU membership was going hand in hand with NATO membership. And NATO membership is a problem for a neutral country because it's a military alliance. And I think some of the issues that we are solving now, not yet solving what we're having, basically, with the war in Ukraine, is the result of this connection. But I see now there is a way for Ukraine to join EU. I think that's a good solution. But neutrality, I think, could also be a good solution at this joint with the EU, if of course it's acceptable by the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you for all the great questions. Thank you also for a very heated discussion. And now I invite you to the official and closing ceremony of the conference. Thank you, everyone.